Welcome to the Polite Conversations podcast, where every episode is focused on civility, decorum, and good manners. And I'm your lovable, non-controversial host, Ina. If you know me, you know I definitely don't like to ruffle any feathers at all. This is part 3 of a 3-part episode. If you haven't yet checked out parts 1 and 2, please listen to those first. I'll link them in the show notes. In this part, we discuss several phrenology-adjacent scenes and online movements. It's as fun, if not more, than part 1. And if you've enjoyed this content and want to see more stuff like this, please consider supporting the show via patreon.com/nicemangoes. And please leave an Apple Podcast or Spotify review, because I'm sure I'm about to get some hate reviews from race science fans, so balancing that out would be wonderful. And of course, it helps more people find the show. Here's the episode.
I guess breaking down the logic, it's there's like cold winters, so you have to like plan during the warm season and then store food, and that requires like this extreme amount of natural selection pressure on intelligence, as Kevin said. So you also have like seasons of drought in Africa,
right,
where which also requires planning. You have to. I always wonder, like, how is the selection pressures so different in, like, Northern Europe compared to Africa? And you never really get, like, a proper answer because, of course, it's all arbitrary. You could say, like, the opposite for Africa. Actually, like, Africa has, like, way more extreme, like, selective pressures for intelligence. While, in Europe, it's just kind of like, half the year you're kind of just taking it easy, right? You've already done all your work, so you can just kind of like sit back and huddle in the cold. Well, so you can make all sorts of just like arguments.
Exactly. You could just make this shit up. Yeah.
So I'm surprised no one hasn't done like a hot summers theory yet and just tried to publish it in Mankind Quarterly.
I think that's the thing. Like there was that theorizing being done. I think it was like ancient Greece or like Mediterranean or North African civilizations were talking about how uncivilized like people in Europe and Northern Europe were, and attributed that to like winters or something. Like the harsh environment hampered their development. And so it was the complete flip side when the core of kind of human civilization was in warmer areas.
Right.
I mean, if you told like ancient Romans, like actually like these Nordics, they're like super smart. They would have laughed at you because they're like, no, these people, we hate them. They live in mud huts, stuff like that. So it is interesting how like, of course, just throughout history, cultures kind of rise and fall, civilizations rise and fall, and so you can kind of make up any sort of argument you want from a pseudo-evolutionary point of view. Right. So, like, where's the scientific rigor in that?
It's all in Evo Psych. That's where it is. Yeah, so did you want to talk about Jeffrey Miller and his your favorite?
I love talking about Jeffrey Miller. And his wife.
And his lovely wife, yeah. I believe by now she's like openly identifying as a eugenicist. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
So, I suppose, we can talk about them because, it is not off topic at all because they are very much adjacent to or like heavily, I guess, involved in like contemporary race science, communities on the internet. So Diana Fleischman, Jeffrey Miller's wife. She is the editor of this Substack called Aporia Magazine, which is basically, I guess, just like a white nationalist rag, basically, where there are various like guest essayists writing about, topics like IQ and race and so on. And they have a YouTube channel where they, invite on white nationalists like Jared Taylor, for example, to discuss.
Really?
Yeah.
and Steve Saylor, it's literally like Quillette, except it's new Quillette, but more racist.
More, yeah.
It is Quillette, full Quillette.
Damn.
Yeah, Claire Lehman didn't have the balls to go the full Quillette.
But the full white nationalist route. That Jared Taylor is like hardcore open white supremacist.
I think if you go on the site, like look at their most recent interviews, like all of them is like, what is white identity? Like, is it okay to be white? And like just like mile after mile of that, and like Steve Saylor, Jared Taylor, a bunch of other folks like that.
Nice. And yeah, I remember when Diana was a little bit more timid and she would do like these Twitter surveys, like, is dating eugenics? Is like, because she tried to do the whole like, well, everybody's a eugenicist then, so how is it bad that I'm a eugenicist? If you are selecting your date, then you're a eugenicist.
Yeah. That was interesting. I mean, it's funny because you like look at her Twitter bio now and it like says like, I'm no longer in academia, so I can say whatever I want. So there you go. This is just like
mask off.
I guess having like speaking your mind is more important than getting paid.
What's funny is that the mask was barely on before. Like, it's that confusing Richard Hanania situation where there's an expose on Richard Hanania and everyone's like, wait, what's the surprise? Because he's been saying this stuff under his own name.
Oh yeah, exactly.
I just can't believe that this person who's been saying racist and eugenicist things for years actually believes it.
Yeah.
Well, they really believe it. Wow.
So Diana also went to NatalCon. I think she was a speaker there, which is like a breeding conference, essentially. Like,
I beg your pardon, a what?
Where they encourage people to breed.
Oh, like as in have babies.
Yes, yeah.
Like pronatalist.
Yes,
See.
yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I mean.
Yeah.
It's all very weird. And then they have like this, a couple of like non-white hangers-on as well. It's really weird and it's very embarrassing for me as a brown person. There's like an ex-Muslim called Sarah Haider. She used to be one of like the more moderate seeming ex-Muslims. Now, technically, I'm also like a non-believer of Muslim background, so technically an ex-Muslim, but like definitely not identifying with that weird-ass far-right, like insane movement of ex-Muslims. So, yeah, Sarah used to be like one of the slightly better seeming ones, but now she has gotten so unhinged and like identifies as like trad-ish herself, and it's bizarre to see like someone leaving conservative Islam and go full circle into accepting a lot of those trad perspectives, but just like packaged as Western. So like she's questioning like no-fault divorce. She said that only people who don't have children or have children old enough to drive should have access to no-fault divorce. And she's been like talking about pro like spanking children views, like This is another thing.
Come on.
No, seriously, they are all. Even Diana was like. Okay, let me back up for a second. There's this couple. You may have seen them, like with the funky glasses.
Yes,
they've been profiled.
Oh, I know. I immediately know who you're talking about. That eugenics couple.
Exactly.
Right.
So
Oh no.
they were profiled in The Guardian recently, and I think they're known for some older headline like "Meet the elite couple breeding to save mankind or save civilization," and so Sarah Hayter's become friendly with them. They're big fans of hers, and Diana's also. So that article talked about how the writer was with them, or with the husband, at a restaurant where they took one of the kids, and the kid's leg like hit the table accidentally, and he like turned around and slapped his face hard enough
Oh God.
enough for the journalist to have reheard it again in her recording. Like, she said she can hear the slap.
Oh wow.
And so like
I remember that. And then when they got pushed back, they like doubled down by being racist. I can't quite remember how.
I bet I can tell you. It's like, well, you're racist because people in the third world will smack their kids.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Sarah Hayter was doing that. So they all got defensive about this couple being called out or criticized for their children, being hit. And Sarah Hayter like tripled down. She was like, well,
Oh, no.
I cannot believe that they are saying these things. Like, and then
Like the IDW realignment is like, because that reactionary branch is so close with like Christian nationalism now. It's like when Richard Dawkins was like, I'm a cultural Christian.
Yeah.
It's the same thing of like, how do you go from being a militant atheist to, because you're like, by being so enmeshed with reactionary politics, so you're like, actually, I'm gonna take the like the nationalism part of Christian nationalism.
So he's always, I think, identified. It's not new. He's always identified as a cultural Christian. There's a whole crop of these militant atheists. Douglas Murray talks about how there's like a God-shaped hole in people's lives now, and they're filling it with wokeness. And
Yeah,
I mean, to go back to the pronatalist stuff and the pronatalist community, I think like kind of what you were alluding to, I have noticed as well, like that these people into pronatalism don't really care about children. Like, there's this underlying current of like, we need to breed to like save the white race.
Yes.
And the actual part of like, having a child because you want to have a child to love the child and like raise another human being, that's kind of like not a thought to these people.
No, yeah. So it's like numbers, and then when you have a lot of children, I guess they're like, how do you keep them in line very quickly, make them understand your message? And it's like, you slap them, you spank them, and it's insane to me that this is coming from like the rational atheist crew that used to like talk about how barbaric and backwards like Islamic cultures were, and there should be no relativism. We should judge things like the same. And now Sarah Hayter is like out there saying, well, my parents beat me and I'm not angry at them for it. And
would you be surprised to learn that some of the like race science adjacent people have also been trying to make the scientific case that like corporal punishment is not actually bad psychologically for your children?
Oh my gosh.
Oh wow.
It's not about like loving another human. It's about like, we're gonna just pump those numbers up for the white race.
Yeah, and so
you gotta pump those numbers up.
These brown people that are hanging out with these phrenologists that are not brown are like also having to like just declare their support randomly for white people having a lot of babies. Like Sarah will randomly tweet, I fully support white people having a lot of babies. But
which is so weird.
It's super weird.
Why does it matter?
And then Razib Khan, this like geneticist, he also talks about like how if his children fall in the playground, like he doesn't care and he stays away. And like it's so
interesting.
Mean, I'm a parent, and I can't tell you how much this stuff, like, it just hurts me to hear that these people are just talking about like having a lot of kids and then just like leaving them to just like fend for themselves or slapping them. And like even in that breeding couple with the glasses article, they talk about how they have child protective services called on them. They don't heat their home even though they can afford to because they give
cold winters theory.
Because they give all their effective altruists. Another thing that has been associated with like eugenics views. There's so many little like threads to this. It's wild, but so they don't heat their home because they give all their remaining money to their own charities, which then are encouraging people to breed. So they think like heating the home is like some kind of like unnecessary luxury, and they have like 4 babies, and and so their 2-year-old was like, while the journalist was there, was on another floor entirely in their house, like by himself.
Just vibing.
Just like you don't leave a 2-year-old like unattended like that.
Yeah. I mean, they're not very good eugenicists. I mean, or maybe they are, because, like, well, if the child dies, it dies. We'll get, selecting for the strongest. Maybe that's their logic, because they are, eugenicists.
So Diana also piped in when, like, they were being criticized, and she's like, well, I knew someone whose toddler bit them every day until she bit her toddler back, and then he never bit her again.
Well, there you go.
Like, can you imagine? Like they're biting their children.
I'm sorry, I can't get into this mindset at all. I don't.
Yeah,
I mean, I treat my pets better than.
But I mean, yes, there might be like a few other like options to communicate like biting bad before going straight to like biting back.
Yeah, that's right.
We exhausted the other options first. That would be my first question.
This is just the master race at work.
Exactly.
We just can't understand how greater the revolutionary fitness is than ours.
They're just so
white people be like biting their children.
This is what happens when your IQ is too high.
Doesn't Elon Musk, isn't he also a pro-natalist,
yes.
by the way?
Yes. Yeah.
He has 11 children, apparently.
Okay, and at least one of his children has disowned him, isn't that right?
Yeah.
I think the others, he's not a part of their life because they were out of wedlock with his various employees.
Oh, jeez. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I mean, like, what can I say?
It's the out of wedlock part that I'm really upset by. No, I'm joking.
No.
How could Elon reject the sanctity of marriage
That's
like this?
Right.
Yeah. No, it's this idea that what matters is spreading your genome around, and it's not about actually raising your kids properly and taking care of them. I think that's offensive.
Yeah.
To tie it maybe somewhere slightly more serious, or we can stay in this space, but the entire like test creale or the sort of long-termism ideology is exactly the same. It's so important that we keep humanity alive by going to Mars that it doesn't matter if we let millions of people suffer right now, preventatively, or for reasons that, you as a tech CEO might not like. But it's that important for this like ephemeral idea of keeping humanity alive in the stars. People in the present tense just have to suffer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, there's some really weird stuff coming from it, and they have so many strange angles. There's also like the anti-mental health stuff. Like, I was just writing like a 4-part series on the ex-Muslim to like fascist pipeline, so I'm sorry that it's like at the front of my mind, but like Sarah Hayter's gone on this like mental health thing where she talks about like how there's too many women in psychology, and mental health care is like turning kids trans, and there should be no like it's just I mean, this is the stuff you hear from like religious conservatives. They're now doing this, like, she also openly says, like, I have all these old school beliefs, but I arrived at them through like a rationalist evaluation.
Pure logic and reason.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting, all these connections between the eugenics and the white supremacist crowd, to be honest. And there seems to be a lot of tech and Silicon Valley support for it, which is interesting, and I'm not sure why. I suspect that it's in part because people who are in tech like to think of themselves as being intelligent, and perhaps there's a kind of bias to accepting that, you are innately like special.
Yeah.
Like you're a chosen kind of person from birth. So maybe the kind of bias towards hereditary explanations for intelligence and other positive personality traits.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because like it's like I have been wondering, like, why is it that like a lot of Silicon Valley people, or like people kind of in that community do kind of end up becoming race scientists or like promoting race science beliefs. I think maybe I guess like one of my thoughts is that these people are kind of obsessed with intelligence and IQ, and like it's a very short journey from like reading up about like IQ to just finding race science beliefs and stuff.
Right, yeah, because those two have been intertwined all along, actually.
How many Pioneer Fund people were, editors at the journal Intelligence? I think Lynn was for a couple of years.
He was there for a long time until he was booted.
A lot of people in that world were like, tipping the scales as editors, to get work, find supportive or reviewers who'd be sympathetic. And then letting, that's how all these papers ended up getting into like what should be respectable journals.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you guys in the article, you talked about how it's still like his work is cited quite a lot till today. I think you said Google Scholar reports more than 22,000 citations, with almost 4,500 of them coming after 2019. That's wild. How does that happen? Like, how does that keep going and going? And I guess like it continues to be legitimized by more and more like mainstream people who don't look as closely into it. And
yeah, I think that's part of it. And another part of it is that there are these editors and like key figures within the IQ science world who are fundamentally okay with this stuff. They think it's, science. Yeah. Even if they're not like themselves producing it, they seem to think that it's legitimate.
But it's been laundered so much. The original Lynn IQ work was in Mankind Quarterly. One was in, I think, a random academic press, potentially, and then like 3 others of the books were all from like white supremacist presses. Like,
yeah,
I think even the one that like Washington Summit, which is the one that Richard Spencer. Washington Summit publishers was Richard Spencer's connected to the National
There's so many
Politics.
Richards.
Goddamn.
Yes.
So yeah, so they were publishing these books in like either their Pioneer Fund affiliated press or Washington Summit, like explicitly far right extremist publishing presses. But it gets laundered into mainstream literature by being cited from some other groups. People probably see it being cited and used in other works, and they decide to use it in their own.
Yeah.
And it just kind of snowballs like that until we're at this point where there's over 1,000 citations to some of these national IQ data sets.
Yeah, so like the first sort of port of call is in Mankind Quarterly, that journal that was funded by the Pioneer Fund. And then you've got a group of academics who are into this stuff, who are then citing articles that are in the Mankind Quarterly in intelligence and in personality and individual differences, and this kind of a group of journals that deals mostly in IQ research. And then you'll get like more sort of like distant journals on completely different topics who you'll get an academic who comes along and wants to like study maybe the relationship between IQ and climate change or something like that. And they'll just adopt this Richard Lind data without really looking into its provenance at all.
I think really important is that like this is the strategy of the Pioneer Fund and these groups. You know, when Philippe Rushton's books were being published, they paid to distribute them and mail them to like random academic departments, just to have this like trash race science book show up in their mailbox.
Wow.
You know, William Shockley, the Nobel laureate for the transistor, I think, was being used to try to launder some of this white supremacist stuff, and even like fully converted Arthur Jensen to be part of the Pioneer Fund by like sharing these papers, and they tried to distribute those papers to Congress to try to get laws passed. And so like this entire subversion of academic standards and this laundering of like white supremacist bullshit into legitimate institutions is like one of their prime motives and actions.
Yeah. Yeah, like Rushton as well actually circulated sort of his works to, like, he would just spam academics, particularly in evopsych and evolutionary anthropology, and people who used to go to the HBES conferences. He'd just, send out these kind of screeds to them, like either mailing them. I think in the time it was like all snail mail, so like he'd just like send them to people's academic addresses.
Wow. And but yeah, before we close out today, I wanted to talk about like how these types of views continue to be used to like do extreme harm even today. So does anyone want to take that question?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in first. I mean, as Kevin and Catherine mentioned in the article, like Richard Lynn, his work has been cited in like the manifestos of two mass murderers. I think one of them was a Buffalo shooter in America, and the other one was I think a mass shooter in Norway, I believe. So you see this like direct link between, say, like race science, as in like published articles in like these, say, like IQ or intelligence journals, and just like straight up like violent racist reactionaries. So there's like this very clear and direct link between just the race science and and violence, racist violence. And you also see, as again, it was in the stat article, where race science is basically used to justify all sorts of heinous things like social inequality, or even like the genocide going on right now in Gaza, where you have Richard Lynn a while ago wrote an article about the Palestinian IQ, again the same kind of like bad science, where he was estimating IQ. And you see this like cited by Zionists now on Twitter, being like, oh, these Palestinians, they have low IQ, they're dumb, they like deserve to die. So again, this direct link between race science and an ongoing genocide is pretty disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, especially kind of related to the way it's being weaponized with like the genocide in Gaza, is it underlies a lot of the like great replacement theory and like anti-immigrant sentiment with this idea that you're bringing in hordes of inferior, you know, that the whole, it really stacks right into the anyway, I long opined about the decay of Western civilization caused by immigration that, you know, Richard Lynn had in that first quote. And so it underlies this whole logic of immigration from these parts of the world are bad because they're, you know, genetically inferior, low IQ, and they're going to, you know, destroy Western civilization. It brings this to this like catastrophized existential threat that, you know, fuels things like Great Replacement. And so I think that's another space where this data set, what's trying to do is especially, you know, dangerous and toxic.
Yeah, that's horrifying.
Yeah. I think there's a range of ways from trying to affect policy. So, you know, trying to diminish the arguments for things like diversity hires, you know, that's long been a goal, is to try and, you know, undermine affirmative action kind of initiatives, that kind of thing, to stoking these kind of myths of Great Replacement and propaganda for the most violent white supremacist types, you know, like with Richard Lynn's data appearing in the manifestos of these people who are committing these atrocities. But bringing it back to the situation with Gaza and the dehumanization of those people using Richard Lynn's IQ, I remember at the time seeing someone tweeting about this, and it was also at the time that South Africa, which has its own history, you know, and of apartheid, and reasons like why a lot of South Africans really like sympathize with the plight of Palestinians. It kind of like, you know, it was like, well, the Palestinians have this low IQ, and so do South Africans. If you look at this national IQ data, you know, so like just sort of like reducing all of that political experience basically to IQ, which for me was especially disgusting, actually, to see, you know, like to see how quickly this idea of like someone cast as having a low IQ, how quickly that descends into like just total dehumanization of that person or that group of people. So, and like it's done with that like in mind, and that people know that intelligence is such a highly valued trait that people will look down on those who they see as less intelligent as being inferior humans, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's so horrifying to think that, like, how people justify these things. And whatever you're saying, like, I've heard echoes of it among all these IDW types, like the clash of civilizations, and, like, how, you know, Muslim immigrants are barbaric, inherently violent. And Sam Harris has been pushing Great Replacement for a while. Like, I think he's sort of toned it down after the Christchurch thing because he was called out on it.
Oh, really? I did not know that. Wow.
And he used to like recommend books like that are like Alex Jones type conspiracy theory books, like Eurabia.
It's like Europa or something.
Eurabia.
Oh, yeah, Eurabia, that's right, yeah.
And he talked about how, like, I think he said this, like, 15 years ago or something, that in 25 years, France is going to be, like, majority Muslim. And, like, it's nowhere near that.
That's one of those, like, extrapolating 50 years down the line from shoddy data.
Yeah. And then he doesn't own it either, right? He's not like, oh yeah, I was wrong. He's like, oh, I got my numbers from this insane conspiracy book. He won't say it like that, but he'll like, oh, I got my numbers from this book. And it's like, yeah, own the fact that you promoted stuff from this ridiculous book. But no. And then, you know, there's Douglas Murray, who's been cosplaying as a war journalist and is being honored by these genocidal Israeli officials. And he's just loving the rehabilitation and sort of like image boosting that he's getting from like just defending Israel in the most ridiculous ways possible. And he's pretty anti-Semitic adjacent himself. Like Viktor Orban is like a huge fan of his book, and he's written articles titled "Is Now a Good Time to Talk About Jews and Money?" He's
oh wow, gross.
What? I was not aware of this.
He's written this book that was really popular in like white supremacist reading book clubs and shit, like The Strange Death of Europe. It was recommended like by Identity Europe or
Europa.
Europa.
Yeah.
And also at the beginning of this genocide, he started doing this like Holocaust revisionism, where like at least the Nazis felt bad for what they did.
That's right. I remember that.
Like,
which is just crazy.
It was unhinged, and a lot of Zionists were supporting him and cheering him on.
This is Douglas Murray you're referring to.
Yes.
Yeah, because I know of him and I know of his work, but because he's not like actually doing scientific racism, I haven't like followed too closely, but he's a pretty worrying figure.
He's always been one of those where it's so transparent how much of a white supremacist it is. I feel like I'm going crazy that like no one else, like Eric Kaufman is another one who does the exact same stuff. Because Eric Kaufman is a professor somewhere and is also part of Richard Hanania's little fake think tank.
Right.
And then Douglas Murray's just sort of like in that exact same sphere of like, there's barely any pretense to the rhetoric that they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. And then Douglas Murray is like saying things now like, you see, the Palestinians can't run anything. They can't run school. It's like, do you see the conditions that they have lived under for decades? Like, it's a wonder how resilient they are and how they have survived this awful oppression. And he's like out there saying they can't do anything. Look at how they live. And it's like the same kind of shit that Ben Shapiro says. Like Arabs like to bomb crap and live in sewers and
it's just disgusting racism, really. Nothing more than that, really.
There's a lot of bad Murrays.
Are we talking about Charles Murray or Douglas Murray? The statement is correct in both cases.
Douglas Murray.
All I know is that now, if I come across the last name Murray, I find it highly suspect, and I cannot trust that person unless they prove themselves to be non-racist first.
Gotta run away.
The hereditary racism passed down through the Murray line.
That's right. Their skull shapes. There's something up with them.
My new theory of nominal determinism. The name Murray is intrinsically racist. Sorry, Bill.
Oh yeah, there's him too. Right. I don't know. Have you looked deeply into Bill Murray? I would.
I think as far as I know, he's at least just an asshole. But maybe there's something dark to dig into.
But it's so horrendous to see echoes of exactly what you're talking about in like these podcast circle jerks and stuff, and to see like how data like this justifies mass slaughter in the forms of shootings, in the forms of genocide that we're witnessing. And it's not to be taken lightly.
Yeah, it's very destructive.
So you guys, in your article, said that you wanted journals to retract. Did you hear back from any journals that say they'll look into the information and retract?
Not since the publication of the article, no. At the time when we had to reach out to them for comment, one or two of the journals said that they were always open to, retracting things if they had specifics. But I mean, they've had the specifics. One of our co-authors, Rebecca Sear, had written with detailed kind of critiques, and they, like some of the journals concerned, had rejected or just not replied to those critiques. So, like it's kind of doubtful that anything will move just at this point unless there's some other source of pressure. So, we've released this article, but we sort of feel that, someone else or some other, sources maybe need to take up the baton and maybe also apply some pressure at this point.
Yeah.
Before anything will happen.
I hope so.
Yeah, and in several cases, the places where it's published have current editors who are just like outright sympathetic to it. And so because editorial decisions ultimately fall on editors-in-chief, and a lot of publishers don't want to step in, those guys aren't going to do anything about it. They think that they're like protecting academic freedom and, stopping woke orthodoxy. So there's kind of this like institutional challenge of when science doesn't self-correct, how do you institute that? Yeah. And so, after Rebecca tried so long to contact folks, we tried this article, and hopefully the article can kind of help spur something going forward.
Yeah, I really hope so. I'll link it in the show notes and encourage everyone to read it and share it. And really good work. I'm always thankful to come across non-racist scientists and academics. But it's the scientists that I am like always like seeing awful versions of. So, yeah, it's just the space that I'm in online, the atheist and IDW watching space. It's full of gross scientists. So whenever I see a not racist scientist, it's like, wow. It's so nice to see. Yeah.
Yeah, that I think sort of your focus on the IDW and related things, there is a little selection bias to seeing scientists who are sort of being vocal about noxious ideologies.
Absolutely.
Over there. But yeah. But no, it's a problem, especially in the human behavioral sciences.
I think the few books which I would recommend to people to like, if you want to like learn more and kind of learn more about why race science sucks and like what it's all about. There's a great book by Aaron Panofsky called Misbehaving Science. It covers the history of racism in behavioral genetics really well. And there's another book by William Tucker called The Funding of Scientific Racism, which gets really right into the history of like the Pioneer Fund. It's very eye-opening.
He also has an online book because he unfortunately passed away, I think, last year. But he has a newer book that is open access called Perspectives on the Bell Curve.
Yeah.
I think that's what it's called. It's open access. You can find it online. You can download a PDF.
Cool. Lynn also passed away last year, right?
Yeah,
Sadly,
it was within the realm of possibilities that the article would be published the week after his death.
Oh,
which is a misconnection for sure. Talk about striking while the iron's hot.
Actually, we had kind of written the first draft of this article while Lynn was still alive, and we intended for this to be published while he was still alive, actually, but it took time.
Yeah, you never got to read it, which is sad.
So do you want to shout out all the other authors? I mean, I would have happily had all of them on, but it would have been absolutely wild to have like an
8-person. Yeah, there's plenty of folks. So John Phillips is the person who wrote most of the Southern Poverty Law Center entries for Scientific Racists, and so you can enjoy his work there. Rebecca has written quite a bit, including a preprint, and was part of Stats podcast, interviewed her and Dan. So there's more different sets of details that you can get from them. And
James Lingford.
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy.
I am struggling to remember exactly, who wrote what actually at this point, to be honest. But
there was someone called Jedediah, I think.
Yeah.
Right, Jed.
How can we forget Jed?
I remember that because that's a name I don't hear often or see often, so I remember that name.
Right, yeah. Jed is particularly good at. I mean, he's actually written some good articles about the dissemination actually of this kind of race science into the popular sphere, and he's quite good at sort of like tracking that with data analysis and innovative ways of doing that. So there was a little bit of that actually in the article.
He had
some analysis.
A great editorial in Nature about how far-right extremists and white supremacists misuse genetics data, and I think an article in Science for the People along a similar line. Very cool. Yeah.
This is why Sam Harris says Nature and the Lancet have been destroyed by wokeness.
There were a lot of people mad about it. A lot of like behavioral geneticists like, you can't blame us because a racist cited our work in a mass shooting. And it turns out, yeah, you can kind of.
Yeah, we should send you the links to those.
Yeah, definitely.
Have them in the show notes because they're definitely really good articles.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. It was such a pleasure speaking to you all. And I know there's been a conspiracy theory about whether Mr. Evo Psych and Kevin Bird are the same person. So I guess that puts that to rest. Unless
can finally put it to bed.
Unless,
we debunked.
There's one person doing two voices and two accents.
This is just how good AI has gotten. You can be on a mic and activate the Australian accent.
As we were saying before we started recording, we have like a lovely range of accents on this episode, and I hope you guys have been using your accent calipers to determine things.
Please estimate my IQ from my accent.
Yeah, there was something about criminality there with the Australian. Well, thank you guys again so much. It was super fun talking to you.
No, thank you so much.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support it, there are several ways you can do that. You can share it online, talk about what you just heard. You can leave a 5-star review to help others find it too. And you can also subscribe via patreon.com/nice mangoes. No E in mangoes. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter before it's completely wrecked, you'll find me at Nice Mangoes. Again, no E in mangoes.